Jean-Claude Van Damme didn't arrive in Hollywood. He exploded into it, shiny and suspended mid-air in the middle of a split. There was a time, and not that long ago, when Jean-Claude Van Damme was the hottest man on the planet. Not just famous, not just handsome. Hot. Steamy 80s action movie, vaguely European, glistening thighs in a leotard kind of hot. The kind of hot that made your mom pretend she didn't rent Kickboxer 3 times in one weekend. The kind of hot that could only exist before irony was invented. And yet, behind the perfect bone structure and the unnaturally flexible hamstrings was a man spiraling into chaos. A man so high on his own legend and other powdered encouragements that he went from A-list heartthrob to C-list cautionary tale before he even turned 40. This isn't just the story of a man who could do the splits between 2 moving trucks. It's the story of how beauty, fame, ego, and addiction created a cinematic Greek tragedy in spandex. But first, let's talk about the body. From Belgium with biceps, Jean-Claude Camille Francois van Varenberg was born in 1960 in Sint-Achtha-Berchem, a suburb of Brussels, to a florist and an accountant. He wasn't always the Van Damme. He made himself that, out of nothing but relentless training, a soft-eyed intensity, and a lifelong obsession with martial arts, ballet, and Bruce Lee. That's right, ballet. He trained in it for 5 years, and it shows. His physique wasn't just sculpted, it was engineered. That freakish flexibility, years of splits, kicks, stretches, and discipline. By the time he was 20, he was already a black belt in karate, a competitive bodybuilder, and possessed of a body so absurdly symmetrical it looked fake. And when he posed for early fitness mags, he didn't just flex, he arched. He seduced the camera. Even his face was a contradiction, equal parts cherubic and lethal. Ice blue eyes, soft lips, but with cheekbones that could cut glass and a jawline like a Marvel prop. He wasn't just action hero hot, he was mysterious Euro-villain hot. And he wanted Hollywood to notice. The journey, from limousine driver to bloodsport legend. At 22, Van Damme left Belgium with barely any English, a duffel bag, and the kind of ambition you only find in the very beautiful or the very delusional. He waited tables, delivered pizza, and famously worked as a limousine driver for Chuck Norris. But he wasn't just hustling, he was stalking the dream. In 1986, he performed a literal high kick during an impromptu street audition outside a producer's office, the kind of thing only a pre-social media maniac could get away with. And somehow, it worked. In 1988, Bloodsport hit theaters, and it didn't just land, it crushed. It was sweaty, violent, ridiculous, and Van Damme was incandescent. That slow-motion scream, iconic. The montage of him training blindfolded while dripping in sweat, legend. It was a deeply unserious film that accidentally birthed a sex symbol, and suddenly JCVD was everywhere. The golden era, muscles, money, and movies with 2 of him. What followed was a run of glorious, oiled-up excess. Kickboxer, Cyborg, Lionheart, Death Warrant. The names were all interchangeable. The plots, irrelevant. The budget, mostly baby oil. Van Damme wasn't acting, he was existing. Shirtless, grunting, occasionally doing ballet kicks in jeans. In 1991, he starred in Double Impact, playing twin brothers. Because if one Van Damme is good, 2 is obviously better. The film was wild, incoherent, and fantastic. He fought himself, emotionally and physically, and the audience ate it up. By this point, JCVD was making $6 to $8 million per movie. He had a mansion, a personal dojo, and enough fan mail to wallpaper a small country. But something darker was creeping in. Beneath the pecs, the charm, and the splits was a man beginning to unravel. Jean-Claude Van Damme wasn't just blowing up at the box office, he was blowing up his life, one white line and one shirtless tantrum at a time. By the mid-90s, Jean-Claude Van Damme had it all. Money, fame, a Porsche for every day of the week, and thighs you could bounce quarters off of. He was the king of direct-to-video muscle cinema, and unlike his peers, he wasn't just brawny, he was balletic. He was beautiful. He was dangerous. He was expensive. And that's when it all started to go off the rails. Let's be blunt. Jean-Claude had an ego the size of a Belgian cathedral. But instead of humility, what kept that ego in check early on was his obsession with discipline. The grind, the splits, the sweat, the fantasy of becoming a living god of cinema. But fame did what fame always does. It stripped the man down to his worst instincts. The rise of the diva. It started small. Tardiness, demands, rewrites, random on-set absences. But quickly things escalated. On Street Fighter, 1994, Van Damme was paid a staggering $8 million, a third of the film's entire budget, and proceeded to show up late, blow off rehearsals and disappear for long stretches, allegedly due to health issues. According to director Steven D'Souza, Van Damme was blasting through $10,000 worth of nose candy a week. He reportedly insisted on having his own private gym on set, refused to work more than a few hours a day, and was engaged in an off-screen affair with pop star Kylie Minogue while married. Because of course. His erratic behavior tanked the film's production schedule and morale. One cast member later said that you never knew what version of Jean-Claude you were getting on any given day, action hero, flirt ghost, or egomaniac, and Street Fighter wasn't even the worst of it. Throughout the early to mid-90s, Van Damme was operating in what can only be described as a white haze of stardom. He later admitted to doing up to 10 grams a day, with little to no sleep, no real friends, and no ability to distinguish between his on-screen personas and his real life. He wasn't just living fast, he was disintegrating in real time. Marriages fell apart, lawsuits were filed, films got cancelled, and Jean-Claude? He just kept flexing, fighting, and pretending it was all under control. The body was still intact, but the man, gone. Career in free fall. By the late 90s, his box office draw had evaporated. Studios didn't want to deal with the chaos, and younger, hungrier action stars with less drama and better American accents were rising fast. Van Damme's films shifted from theatrical releases to straight-to-video, to straight-to-nobody cares. The Quest, Knockoff, Legionnaire. The budgets shrank, the scripts got worse, and JCVD's behavior became more desperate. He was no longer playing the cool, collected killer. He was now typecast as the sweaty, haunted loner. And this time, it wasn't acting. The tragedy of a pretty face. There's something uniquely painful about watching a beautiful person lose their beauty, not because of age, but because of self-destruction. Van Damme's downfall wasn't a slow fade. It was messy. It was public. And it was preventable. This wasn't just a washed-up actor. This was a man in crisis. A man who once trained in ballet to master his body, now letting it rot from the inside out, one line at a time. But just when everyone counted him out, he did something nobody expected. He got honest. It wasn't a comeback. It was a confession, wrapped in a monologue, dipped in self-loathing, and served with a side of action nostalgia. By the early 2000s, Jean-Claude Van Damme had faded into that quiet Hollywood exile where former stars go to do protein powder commercials and make awkward cameos on European game shows. He'd burned too many bridges. The big studios weren't calling. The martial arts crowd had moved on. The muscles were still there, but the sparkle, gone. It would have been easy, even expected, for JCVD to slink off into obscurity, another 90s relic with a coke habit and an IMDb page full of straight-to-video flops. But instead, he leaned in, hard. In 2008, Van Damme released JCVD, a surreal, low-budget Belgian film where he plays a fictionalized version of himself, washed up, broke, and accidentally caught in a post-office hostage situation. Sounds like a weird, self-indulgent vanity project, right? Except it wasn't. JCVD was raw, sad, strangely funny, and devastating. The real shock came in the film's most infamous scene, a 6-minute unscripted monologue where Van Damme, eyes glassy and exhausted, confesses He talks about drugs, about failure, about letting his family down, about being a puppet of Hollywood, of his fans, of his own broken dreams. He breaks the fourth wall, literally and emotionally. He says, "I've done some things in my life, messed up. I've hurt people, and I ask for forgiveness. It wasn't acting. It was therapy, in front of a camera, in a single, uncut take." The world took notice. Critics, many of whom had spent years mocking his accent and cheesy movies, were floored. Suddenly, Jean-Claude Van Damme wasn't just a punchline, he was a person. Time magazine called his performance an unexpectedly nuanced and soulful turn. Variety said it was an act of raw, emotional bravery. And audiences, especially those who had grown up watching him kickbox his way through the 90s, felt it. Here was a man who had lost everything, and knew it. Off the back of JCVD, Van Damme leaned into the self-awareness. He embraced the meme. He did commercials spoofing himself. He let people laugh with him, not just at him. And suddenly, he was cool again. In 2013, he went viral for doing a perfect split between two Volvo trucks at age 53. It wasn't CGI. It wasn't fake. It was the real deal. A perfect split. In motion. While delivering a monologue about balance and strength, the world watched in awe. The internet never forgot. The thing about Van Damme is this: even when he was melting down, people wanted to root for him. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't a predator. He was just a hot mess. A gorgeous, tortured martial artist who went too fast, too hard, and finally realized it. The internet, ever nostalgic, wrapped its arms back around him. Clips of his early films started trending again. Old interviews resurfaced. Memes celebrating the muscles from Brussels popped up everywhere. The new generation didn't know him as a washed-up has-been. They knew him as the guy who could still do splits on command and wasn't afraid to cry on camera. For every kick he landed on screen, there was a bruise left behind the scenes, and not all of them healed. Jean-Claude Van Damme wasn't just a martial arts star. In the 90s, he was a sex symbol, full stop. The glossy eyes, the sculpted jawline, the absurd flexibility, the shirtless splits that defied anatomy, the French-Belgian accent that made even clunky lines sound vaguely romantic. And let's not forget, the man could wear a pair of tight jeans like it was an Olympic sport. He was handsome in that almost unfair way, a kind of living Ken doll who could also roundhouse you unconscious. But being that beautiful in Hollywood comes with a catch, especially for men. A curse in disguise. For all his physical gifts, Van Damme was constantly underestimated. People didn't expect depth. They didn't want it. They wanted kicks, splits, and maybe a slow-mo scene of him oiling his biceps before punching a villain through a wall. Producers didn't care about his ideas. Directors cut his lines short. Studios pushed him harder, faster, and more recklessly than his body could realistically keep up with. He wasn't a man. He was a product. And eventually, the product cracked. In interviews much later, Van Damme admitted he had been living with bipolar disorder, undiagnosed, through the most explosive years of his fame. The signs were there: the rapid mood swings, the erratic behavior, the grandiose decisions, like editing his own films behind the director's back or randomly challenging co-stars to real fights on set. He confessed to doing up to 10 grams of substances per day during his darkest period. That's not partying. That's self-annihilation. And yet, like so many men of his era, especially in the action genre, Van Damme was taught to hide pain. You didn't ask for help. You clenched your jaw, you threw a kick, and you moved on. Until you couldn't. By the early 2000s, Jean-Claude had been divorced multiple times, burned through millions of dollars, and was reportedly close to bankruptcy. The mansions were gone. The phone stopped ringing. The legend of JCVD had become a cautionary tale, not just about fame, but about what happens when you're treated like an icon before you ever learn to be a person. Even after JCVD 2008 proved he had depth, sincerity, and acting chops, Hollywood mostly shrugged. A few roles trickled in, cameos, guest appearances, a funny commercial or two, but the big studios never gave him the serious shot he'd earned. Because in Tinseltown, a fall from grace is easy to mock and hard to forgive. It didn't matter that he could still outsplit, outkick, and outmonologue half the action stars half his age. His reputation was sealed, unstable, difficult. That guy. Pretty hurts, even for men. What Van Damme's story reveals is something few are willing to say out loud. Being beautiful can be brutal, especially for men in a genre built on brute strength, invincibility, and emotional silence. Jean-Claude Van Damme was too hot to be taken seriously, too open to be protected, too flawed to be forgiven, and still too iconic to ever fully disappear. You can't outkick time, but you can age into myth. By the 2010s, Jean-Claude Van Damme wasn't the box office titan he used to be. The major studios had long since passed him over for newer, shinier action stars, many of them copying his formula: charming rogue, tragic past, roundhouse to the face. But JCVD had one weapon they couldn't steal: icon status. Even if you never saw Bloodsport or Kickboxer, you knew the split. You knew the slow-motion scream. You knew the guy with the muscles, the accent, and the sad eyes. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a meme, a gif, a living legend reduced to pixels, but somehow still cool. In a world obsessed with reinvention, Van Damme became timeless. The splits heard round the world. Let's talk about that commercial. In 2013, JCVD shocked the internet with a Volvo ad. Picture this. Enya's Only Time plays gently in the background as Van Damme performs a perfect, controlled, slow-motion split between two moving trucks. Yes, at age 53. The ad went viral. Not because it was funny, though it was, or nostalgic, which it was, but because it reminded everyone. The man is still a freak of nature. People who hadn't thought about him in 20 years were suddenly posting, tweeting, and calling him the GOAT. In his later years, Van Damme has become, unexpectedly, zen. He's done interviews where he talks about energy, philosophy, even the pain of fame with a kind of fragile honesty that's rare among men of his generation. There's no macho swagger anymore, just a guy who knows he messed up, tried to fix it, and lived to tell the tale. He's spoken about the emotional toll of being typecast, the damage of being beautiful but disposable, and the deep loneliness of being worshipped and forgotten in the same breath. And yet there's no bitterness, just self-awareness. JCVD may not be topping box offices now, but his influence is everywhere. Every snarky action hero with a tragic backstory. Van Damme walked so they could run. Every training montage soaked in sweat and synth music. That's his DNA. Every Gen Z TikTok edit of a guy in 80s gym shorts doing slow-motion splits. Thank him. He was more than hot. He was more than kicks. He was, for a time, the emotional center of a genre that didn't allow emotions, and he never faked it. He was the guy doing the stunts, throwing the kicks, fighting the inner demons. And that's why, even decades later, he's not just remembered. He's respected. Not everyone gets a comeback. Not everyone needs one. Van Damme's true redemption arc isn't in a blockbuster. It's in the way people still care. The way a Volvo commercial can become legend. The way fans still call him the muscles from Brussels with genuine affection, not mockery. He fell, he shattered, he got up, and he still does the splits. Not because he has to, because he can.